Welcome everyone to the 2016 League of American Bicyclists and American Specialty Insurance rollout presentation. We are just going to get started with our guest here from American Specialty. American Specialty has been working with the League on the club insurance program for 24 years now. We have been in partnership on this effort. And they are a trusted advocate for our clubs. They work really hard to get good coverage and do right by clubs and by riders. It's been, I feel, a very productive partnership for our clubs, and we work really hard with American Specialty to make sure that everyone is pleased with that. The main presenter tonight will be Gina Doyle. Gina, I think you might have turned on a webcam or something. I feel like I'm looking at a little tiny picture of a wall or something. There you go. Thank you, Gina. Gina is the VP of Client Services who oversees the team of about 13 different people who are part of the insurance effort working with the league at American Specialty. With her tonight are two of her associates who work the customer service and take your questions as you sign up for insurance, or if you need parts of the policy explained, or you just want to find out how it's going to work for your particular situation. If you call American Specialty, you will probably talk to either Renee Watterson, who's been working with us for 24 years, the whole time that the League and American Specialty have been working together, and Christy Emschweiler, who's newer at it but has been working now for, I think, a little bit more than a year. With our member clubs and making sure that you understand them and they understand you. So in the interest of that understanding and hoping that I have said all the things I need to turn this thing over to Gina, let's go. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you, Scott. And we definitely want to take the opportunity to thank the League for allowing us to partner with you for the past 24 years. We value that relationship very much. And as Scott said, I am here with Renee Watterson, who really has been involved since we started working with the League. And if you have been a part of the insurance program currently or in the past and are considering joining again, you probably have talked to Renee. And as Scott said, if you've called in the last year, you likely have talked to Christy. So happy to have both Christy and Renee here with me tonight. Just a little bit of background about American Specialty. American Specialty is not necessarily the insurance company for the League of American Bicyclists, but we have in-house authority on behalf of insurance companies in certain areas, including claims handling authority, underwriting authority. So while we're not the insurance company necessarily, we have certain authorities, and as Scott said, can advocate in different roles to ensure that we're putting together a quality program that meets the needs of your clubs, but also is cost effective. Our company here at American Specialty, we specialize in sports and entertainment. That's where our focus is, and I think that's really important for the League clubs to understand. We're used to working with clients like the League, where the activities generally involve a little bit higher risk, but the participants are generally aware of those risks and willing to take on and accept some of the risks associated with that activity because the rewards certainly outweigh the risk. One of the areas, as I said, is claims handling authority, and that is also very important to the League because we have experience in this market and in this kind of niche area so that we can quickly respond to a claim, and if you are not liable, we can work really hard and ensure that you have representation to have you removed from a lawsuit or a claim. But if there's a situation where you are potentially negligent, we work to have that case settled as quickly as possible so that there's as little as possible impact on the club. So again, just a little bit of background about American Specialty, and thanking the League and the clubs for entrusting us with this really important part of your business. So we will jump right into the insurance program. And we'll start with who can join the league's insurance program. And it really is any nonprofit who is a current member of the league and whose primary purpose is to promote or organize bicycling activities. And this is really broad. In the insurance market, our underwriters a lot of times want to be able to say, we'll provide coverage for sanctioned activities. They don't necessarily like kind of that blanket approach, but given the long-term partnership with the league and us really understanding your business, we're able to kind of have that broad base of any nonprofit who is a current member of the league eligible for the insurance program. Your club or the entity does not need to be incorporated or have tax-exempt status to be eligible for insurance. And one note here is that the program is not available for entities who's primarily engaged in mountain biking activities. That's one area where, just from an insurance perspective, it's not something that we're able to contemplate under this program. During the session tonight, we're going to talk a lot about the base program, which includes general liability coverage and excess accident medical coverage. And I'm going to get into the detail of each of these coverages a little bit later, but this is more of an overview slide. There's also optional coverages that the clubs can and should, in our opinion, consider, including excess limits, directors and officers liability, and non-owned and hired automobile liability coverage. And we're going to talk tonight about why, if you have, for example, general liability coverage, do you need directors and officers liability coverage? And there are certain coverages that are not available through the club program, and we recommend that if you have an exposure here that you work with a local agent to secure the appropriate coverage. And that includes workers' compensation coverage, property coverage for your owned property, and owned automobiles. So if your club has an automobile that they own, that's not something that we can insure under this program. Wanted to give just a snapshot view of the participation for the 2015-16 policy period. We had 504 clubs purchase coverage and 172 advocacy organizations purchase coverage. The advocacy organizations increased quite a bit this past year, so that, that's great news. We know that you're out there doing what you all do best and advocating for safe cycling activities. And with respect to the optional coverages, we had approximately 186 clubs purchase directors and officers liability. I can remember a time in looking back through the notes where we had only a handful of clubs in purchasing this important coverage. And again, we'll talk about why this coverage is so important. We had 20 clubs purchase a standalone non-owned and hired automobile liability policy, and approximately 13 clubs add additional limits to the $1 million limit that's provided under the general liability policy. LCIs are automatically covered under the general liability policy, so we don't have necessarily a number here, but just reiterating that LCIs are covered under this program. So we want to get into the difference between, really with respect to the insurance program, the difference between a bicycle club and an advocacy organization, and how these two organizations really, what's the difference between the coverages and how they're paid for. The coverages are pretty consistent between the two, a bicycle club and an advocacy organization, but they are paid for differently. Advocacy organizations pay a flat premium to join the program, and it's not impacted by their membership size. The reason for that is really that advocacy organizations traditionally have a large membership donor base, but very few rides, if any. So while the bicycle clubs pay based on their membership, and obviously have a lot of times a large number of recreational type rides, we knew that the advocacy organizations wouldn't, that wasn't a fair premium basis for the advocacy organizations. In order to meet the definition from an insurance perspective, as an advocacy organization, you have to be an organization who has 26 or fewer club rides annually, with an average of 50 or fewer riders in attendance for those rides. So if you don't conduct any recreational rides other than special events, you would be eligible as an advocacy organization. If your club conducts 27 or 30 rides, then you would bump into the bicycle club category. All other premiums that apply, for example, for special events, which we'll get into a little bit later, the rates are the same for both the advocacy organization and bicycle clubs. We wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what is general liability coverage. General liability coverage provides protection for liability claims. And it's really third-party liability claims of bodily injury, property damage, and personal and advertising injury. We included a couple examples of what a bodily injury type claim is. And these are real examples that we've had here within the LINKS program over the past 24 years. So an example of a bodily injury claim would be a cyclist being struck, or a cyclist striking a person walking on a trail, or falling due to road conditions, or being struck by a vehicle. Property damage liability is, for example, a cyclist striking and causing damage to a vehicle. It's important to remember that property damage liability is not property coverage for the individual's bike, or it's not property coverage for equipment that's owned by the club. It's property damage liability. So there has to be liability on the part of the club causing that damage. And then sports equipment liability, we do have a small limit. We'll talk about the limit, and it is subject to a deductible for sports equipment liability that's really in the care, custody, or control of the club. So an example of that is a bicycle being stolen from a club's bicycle corral. And in order for that to apply, it really has to be that the bicycle was in the club's care, and that's why it was in the corral, and then it was stolen while in the club's care. So that's an example of sports equipment liability. So all of those coverages are included under the general liability policy. I want to talk a little bit about who is covered under general liability. Yes.
I've had actually a couple of people are having some difficulty with the sound. Do you want to try to call in on the phone that you have available? We can do that quick and just see if that improves things for folks. You had offered to do that before, and I thought we'd be okay, but apparently the sound is not good for everyone.
Do you have the number handy, Scott? Oh wait, let me see if I hit this telephone if it will.
So I'll just fill some time while Gina is dialing in, and I hope that that works out for her and improves the audio. Just to elaborate a little bit more on what she was saying about clubs and advocacy organizations. When I started working with the league and working with this insurance program about 5 years ago, the only model we had was clubs, and the assumption was that you had members, and those members were people who rode, and it was all based on sort of a recreational club model. And advocacy organizations would call and say, you know, can we be insured? And you know, we'd say, well, just as apply as a club with 0 members and pay the minimum amount. And after a while, there were enough advocacy organizations interested in the insurance program that it made it silly to have to explain to each and every one of them that we have this workaround. So we instituted an option for the advocacy organizations, and at the same time realized that a lot of advocacy organizations were having these social rides that weren't based on who their members were. Their members might have been financial supporters, as Gina was saying. So that's the basis of the 26 rides a year. If you're riding half the year once a week, or if you're riding every other week year-round, 26 is the number we came up with. It had initially been 12, and we got it expanded to 26. It is for rides that are typically of about 50 people or fewer, so there are certainly some big clubs and big social rides that wouldn't be eligible for coverage. Through that, we can't cover everyone. The clubs are added to the league's own insurance policy. So we try to do something that's a one-size-fits-most, and try to be flexible and find ways to work organizations' circumstances into how we do coverage. But there are sometimes cases that just don't fit. Gina, are you back? Have you managed to dial in?
I have dialed in. Can you hear me?
I hear you. It's different. I'm not actually sure if it's better. Much better. Someone just responded much better. Okay, let's roll with it.
Okay. Certainly stop me if you cannot hear me. And I apologize for anything that you've missed. I'd be happy to offline go back through any of that with anyone. But wanted to talk a little bit about the general liability policy and who is covered under the policy. So again, this policy provides protection to, is going to provide protection to the league bicycle clubs and advocacy organizations that have enrolled and paid the appropriate premium. It also covers its members and volunteers of the insured club and directors, officers, and employees of the insured club. So all of that, the entity and all of those individuals are, again, protected from bodily injury, property damage liability, and personal and advertising injury claims. So that's really important, I would say, for a club and its members, because if you are, as part of your club activity, responsible for organizing a ride, and as a result are named personally in the lawsuit, you want to make sure that you're protected. So that is a huge benefit under this program, where the members and volunteers are also insured under the policy. Also, for covered rides only, first-time invited guests, we do extend that general liability policy for those guests who are just there trying it out for a day to see if it's something that they're interested in joining your club. The noise level still okay for everyone?
I got several comments that it was much improved, so
Okay,
we'll roll with it.
very good. We also wanted to talk about what types of activities are covered under the general liability policy. And again, we're going to break that down into a couple of different categories. The first being club rides, which are recreational bicycle rides that are conducted and supervised by an insured club for which no fee is charged. So it's just your weekly rides that you have with your clubs, for your membership, for an advocacy organization. You want to make sure that you are, if you are having club rides, you are covered for those club rides, as long as you indicate when you're purchasing the coverage that you are providing and offering club rides throughout the year. We also have and make available coverage for special events. And special events are those recreational bicycle rides, again, that are conducted and supervised by an insured club, but where a participation fee is charged. So there's a fee charged to participate in the ride. And Renee, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you don't have to charge members, you don't have to pay premium on members who are participating in these special events.
Right. If you're a bicycle club, you only pay for the non-members of the club.
Okay. And special events, and we'll talk about this a little bit later with respect to the purchasing website, must be reported prior to the event, and then the appropriate premium is paid following the event. And the reason we have it set up like that is that we know that you might not know how many people are going to attend the event, and so you schedule it ahead of time so that we know that you're having the event, and then you go back in and tell us how many people participated, and then you have the opportunity to pay the premium for that. The general liability policy also includes coverage for club meetings, fundraisers, time trials, bike education courses. Again, the bike education courses, that only applies if the insured club indicates it organizes education courses. A little clarification on that point is that we consider a bike education course where you have a registration and you have participants coming in and they're going through a class, not necessarily education in a less formal setting where you're out there advocating for bike safety and during different avenues, whether it be a vendor at a festival or going into the school.
we wouldn't consider that a bike education course. We're talking more where you have an LCI come in and you set up a classroom or on bike training and you offer those education courses. Promoting safe routes to school programs, that's something that's contemplated under the policy. Again, I said promoting. It's not designed to provide coverage for the supervision or implementation of safe routes to school. And bike refurbishment, again, if you purchase the optional bike refurbishment coverage. So you can tell from this description of the bicycle-related activities that there's several areas where you have the option to add certain coverages based on your particular exposures. The limit of liability for the general liability policy is $1 million each occurrence. We do have the option to increase the limit of liability for clubs. Sometimes a governmental entity will require, for example, a $2 million limit, or the club will look at the number of activities that they're having throughout the year and their assets and decide that really $1 million doesn't make them feel as comfortable as an additional $1 million would. We have a couple of ways that we can add the additional $1 million limit. One is a shared limit where we would endorse your club onto the league's excess liability policy. The league, as part of their commitment to the clubs, has decided that they're willing to share their limit with the club, and there's additional premium associated with that. But again, that approach provides a shared limit for the league and all of the clubs. Or you could look at an individual club excess policy, which would apply to your club only. In addition to the $1 million each occurrence limit, which means that for any one claim, we're never going to pay more than $1 million, the policy includes a $5 million general aggregate for each insured entity. So if we have, for example, Christy, Renee, Gina Bike Club, and our limit is going to be $1 million each occurrence and a $5 million general aggregate. So even though it's a group policy, you still have your individual limits. Defense costs are in addition to the limit of liability, which is really important. I was just looking at a claim earlier today that the indemnity unfortunately capped out at the $1 million, but the overall cost of the claim ended up being in excess of $1.2 million because of the defense costs associated with that. And that's really important for a club because you certainly want to be able to have the money to defend yourself in the event of a lawsuit. So defense costs, in addition to the limit of liability, is a really important and great benefit, I would say, to the league's program. And then, as we talked about before, we do have $5,000 of sports equipment liability coverage. Again, this is for equipment that's in the care, custody, or control of the club. The limit is $5,000, and it's subject to a $1,500 per claim deductible. So it's really important to think about that if you are, for example, holding your club members' bikes in a bike corral, because we know that it doesn't take much to get to that $5,000 limit. So you'll want to be careful and potentially even consider additional limits if you really are in the business of taking the bikes and holding them in your care. Important items to know with respect to the general liability policy: release of liability waivers. We have lots of examples. We all know that we recommend, from an insurance perspective, that release of liability waivers are recommended, and we have lots of examples where a crash involving a serious injury was not pursued after the signed waiver was presented to the injured person's attorney. However, we also have examples where certain states, the release of liability waiver is not applicable. If you have a minor waiver, there's sometimes some challenges there because as a parent or guardian, you cannot legally sign away your minor child's right to sue once they reach the age of majority. But we really still feel like it is a strong defense mechanism, and certainly recommend that you have waivers signed for all of your activities. We don't necessarily have a preference between hard copy waivers or electronic waivers. With electronic waivers, a lot of times we recommend, and again, this is a recommendation, it's not a requirement, but that waiver is tied to some type of financial purchase, whether it is $1 or maybe it's the individual's club membership fee. And the reason for that is that it's harder to be able to say, I didn't sign that waiver. That wasn't me who clicked, I understand and agree to the terms and conditions. Again, that's a recommendation. With respect to your membership, your club membership, we believe that one waiver per year that applies for all of your club activities is appropriate. And then for your special events where you have non-members participating, we would recommend a waiver from them as they participate kind of on an as participation basis. A couple of things, again, to know relative to the general liability policy. This program is not designed to provide coverage for racing or commercial bike or repair shops, rentals or bike share programs, for-profit tours, construction or engineering of bike trails, organizing or supervising a walking, biking school bus, and certain alcohol-related losses. What I would say with respect to alcohol is that if you have an activity where you are going to have alcohol, that you reach out to our team so that we can discuss it kind of on a case-by-case basis. The standard general liability policy includes what we call host liquor liability coverage, which applies in very, I would say, rare cases if it could be, and we then, would recommend that you purchase additional coverage if it could be construed that you're in the business of serving or distributing alcohol. So each case is really, each situation is really different, and it's really hard to say black or white when you would need additional coverage. So we just recommend generally on a blanket basis, if you're having alcohol at one of your activities, that you reach out to us so that we can talk through it. With respect to the commercial biker repair shops, this exclusion does not apply to bike refurbishment, where you are taking in a bike and fixing it to be sold or given to someone else. But certainly a traditional commercial biker repair shop is not contemplated under the policy. And then for-profit tours, I know that we've had some clubs who do offer what they call a tour, but it's not necessarily commercial in nature. The participants are paying a fee, but it really is to cover the cost of the actual tour itself. We wanted to take the opportunity because if you've gone online and looked at the insurance purchasing website, you will see that we do have a rate increase this year. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what causes that, and one of the main drivers is the loss results. So just a real quick snapshot view of the loss results for the league. We have roughly 7 general liability claims each year. So we would say, less frequency, but potential for severity is how we would really categorize that here in our office. The 7-year undeveloped loss ratio is 127%. And I really like to include that because I think the further explanation really is helpful, at least from my perspective. What that means when you have a 127% loss ratio is that for every dollar that the insurance company collects in premium, they pay $1.27 out in claims. So they're really kind of behind the ball there in terms of making a profit on the insurance programs that they're offering. So as you can understand, they obviously would like to see that loss ratio be quite a bit lower so that they can continue to pay the claims, but also expenses, we like to say around here, we need to be able to keep the lights on and keep the computers on. So also the claims increased by $1.7 million since this time last year. So when we looked at the claims in December of 2014 and compared them to the claims in December of 2015, we had quite a bit of development. The type that we're seeing, again, we talked a little bit about these and the general liability policy when we went through the description of coverage, but some of the high dollar claims include collisions between bicyclists and a pedestrian, bicyclist struck by a vehicle, and single bicycle crash. So all of the things, again, that we might anticipate with this type of exposure of a cycling organization. We do have some property damage liability claims that occur, but again, they don't represent a large value of the losses that we've paid out. So up to this point, we've been talking about general liability coverage, which again is a third-party liability policy which protects you in the event of a lawsuit. But we also wanted to talk about the other piece of the base program, which is more of a first-party coverage that we refer to as excess accident medical coverage. You might also refer to it as participant accident coverage in the insurance industry. And it is an excess medical coverage that provides coverage for accidental injuries. So in order to trigger coverage under the policy, there has to be an accidental injury. It's not a sickness policy. It's not designed for if you are on a bike or participating in a special event and you become ill and have to stop at the urgent clinic for abdominal pain. That's not something that's covered under this policy. It also includes accidental death and dismemberment benefit. We're going to talk about who it covers and when. Members, again, of insured clubs and first-time invited guests during club rides and time trials conducted and supervised by an insured club. For an advocacy organization, if you indicate when you're purchasing the coverage that you conduct rides and have fewer than the 26 allowable rides per year, then your events would also include excess accident medical coverage. It provides coverage for registered participants and volunteers during special events. We have situations where our volunteers are injured. It could be a slip, trip, and fall as they're setting up the course or they're setting up the registration table. And then all attendees of bicycle education courses organized by an insured club, as long as that club has indicated that they offer bicycle education courses that include on-bike training components. Wanted to talk a little bit about the limit under the excess accident medical policy. This policy is really designed to help offset any out-of-pocket expenses that the injured party might have as a result in participating in one of your events. So there's a $10,000 per person per accident limit, and it is subject to a $500 disappearing deductible. And a disappearing deductible pretty much means that you're likely not going to have to pay anything from a deductible perspective under this policy. So if you've paid $500 under your $500 deductible, or your primary insurance has paid $500, then the deductible disappears. The coverage is excess over any other valid and collectible insurance, which includes your primary health insurance that you have. And then the accidental death and dismemberment benefit is $5,000 per person per accidental injury. Wanted to look at the losses for the excess accident medical policies. The injuries, unfortunately, or fortunately, I would say, range from minor injuries and then unfortunately to catastrophic or fatalities. We track the number of claimants who have other insurance, and as folks are required to secure coverage, we have seen that percentage increase over the years, which ultimately, if there's other coverage in place, helps protect your losses under this policy. And if you can protect the losses under this policy, it helps keep your premiums down. So we have about 94% of claimants who have other insurance. We have about, on average, 100 claims per year, and the average payment per claim is around $1,200. And looking at the loss ratio on this policy, we're at about 90%, so better higher than the general liability policy, but still a little high from an insurance company's perspective. They would like to pay less out in claims than 90 cents for every dollar that they collect in insurance premium. So I don't know, Scott, if there are any questions on the general liability and participant accident coverage before we get into purchasing the coverage online.
Yeah, we have got a few questions here. Some of it is clarification on what people have heard already. So let me run through some of those things. I hope I've got them organized in my head, and try to group them and make it efficient and broadly applicable. The first question is, our club organizes a couple of ice skating outings and winter hikes as off-season activities. Are the members covered for these activities?
The policy is really, the insurance program is designed to provide coverage for cycling activities, so that's not something that would be contemplated under the insurance program.
Okay. We had some questions about waivers. People are always very careful about their waivers and want to make sure they really understand about the waivers. So one point of clarification, and I think I know the answer to this, but in terms of getting waivers from your members, once a year is fine for members, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and I know in the past couple of years, what we've been saying about electronic waivers has evolved a little bit. If that's not something that we're getting to later, could you talk a little bit more about electronic waivers, because that's something more people are moving towards?
Scott, we see a lot more clubs wanting to use electronic waivers, and I think the industry is more successful in defending, claims with electronic waivers than they used to be. One of the important things that we tell people is that if they're using a third party for that electronic waiver, that they need to be sure that there's a resource available to obtain that electronic waiver in the event of a claim. Because it could be that, our claims department will need to come back and ask for a copy of that, so it's important that they are able to obtain that from the third-party vendor.
Right, and we had, it was not specific to the league, but we had here internally in our company a situation where one of our insureds was using a third party, who took on the administrative burden for the insured of storing and securing the release liability waiver and putting it online so that it was easy to use. And then when we had a claim, they didn't have a mechanism for storing the waivers and being able to produce a copy of the waiver. So even though the insured had paid a fee for that service, it really wasn't very helpful to the insured in the event of a claim. So I would say Renee is right that we recommend that you're using a reputable third party if you are not handling that electronic waiver in-house, and that you confirm with them that they can produce a copy of the waiver. We also, as I had said, recommend that the waiver is, the electronic waiver is tied to a credit card transaction so that you can very easily identify that the person who signed that is also the person who included their credit card on file. So those are our standard recommendations. If there are specific questions or additional recommendations that we have provided in the past, we should talk about those for sure.
And the same website that you got on the screen here where you purchase online is also the source for suggested waiver text, correct?
Yes. With the release liability waiver, we have an example on the insurance purchasing website. We also do recommend that you have your local legal counsel take a look at the waiver just to make sure that it's applicable in the state that you are in. But for the most part, the waiver that we have on the website is a waiver that is kind of been tested here in this really market of sports, entertainment, and amateur sports, and we've had a lot of success with the waivers. but yes, an example is available at this website.
And could you use the same text for an electronic waiver that is there, or is there anything that should be different about an electronic waiver?
You can use the same text. Another thing I guess that we would recommend, excuse me, with the waiver is that you are careful about adding any additional information. We feel that it does reduce the likeliness that the waiver will uphold in the court of law if we start adding things like we also give you also give the club permission to use your likeness for marketing materials, because it very easily can be construed, or the individual can claim that I didn't know that I was going to sign away my rights to sue, but rather I thought I was giving permission to use my picture for marketing materials.
Okay. And we had one question more sort of broadly philosophical about waivers, just saying that a signed waiver is, is not effective in protecting a club. That people understand that what they're doing is risky. How is it they can come back and how do clubs have exposure if people there know that they're doing a risky thing?
Right. Again, we do have situations, unfortunately, where a waiver is not permissible for a number of reasons. It could be that the court finds that the club was extremely negligent in the that causing the injury. It could be that from the validity of the waivers really varies from state to state. So, for example, New York is a strong waiver state, but you might have another state, maybe Indiana, where the waivers is what we would consider not a real strong waiver state. So we always like to have them because it gives us something to talk about, but we know that there's always the risk that that waiver is going to be dismissed and not provide the protection that we would like for it to provide to the club. So I guess in short, I would say that there is not a guarantee. It certainly doesn't always eliminate the possibility of a lawsuit, but it helps give us something to talk about from a defensibility perspective. We also have to remember that, some of the claims that we have seen involve pedestrians being struck by a cyclist, and that pedestrian didn't sign a release of liability waiver. So that pedestrian could bring a suit against the club, and we wouldn't have had any waiver on file.
I was going to add that, but you got to it before I could add that and look all smart. So I'll have to find another way to look all smart. And the sample waiver, has that changed? I got some questions. If people are using something that was adapted from what was up there last year, is it still the same, or have things changed that they ought to look at it and revise?
It is still the same. We do review it here internally because we use that waiver for a lot of our clients, but there have not been changes to it for several years. So the form that was on file last year, if you have it ready to go and on your website, it would still be applicable this year.
Okay. We have a couple of questions just trying to understand if you could reiterate about the per incident and aggregate limits. Is the aggregate limit for an insured entity for a year?
Yes. So maybe to give a better overview of the per occurrence compared to an aggregate. So the general liability policy says for any one claim, it's not going to pay more than $1 million for that one claim. What the aggregate does for the club, and again, the aggregate applies separately to each individual club, is it allows a club to have up to 5 $1 million losses under the policy for, and it is an annual, it's a February 1st to February 1st. So you could have a club who has 5 $1 million losses under the policy, and the general liability policy would respond. If you have a 6 $1 million claim, again, it all has to occur in the same policy period. that sixth $1 million claim is not covered, and that's where the excess liability policy comes into play if you purchase that, and would be obviously extremely helpful. I can tell you that we have generally, I would say, in our company, we don't run into an issue where the aggregate is breached. It's really unlikely. It would be really unlikely for a club to have 5 separate $1 million occurrences.
Okay, and someone asked, what does shared limit mean as a practical matter?
Okay, great. And I had mentioned the shared limit from, with respect to the excess liability policy. And again, we would encourage clubs to at least consider an excess liability policy, which adds an additional $1 million of liability protection, so that if you have a claim that settles or you're found legally liable for $1.5 million for one occurrence, if you have an excess policy, the general liability policy would provide the first $1 million, and then the excess liability policy would provide the $500,000. And then defense costs, like I said, are outside that limit. But with the shared policy, so you have 2 options to secure excess liability coverage. One is to add coverage under the leagues program, and what we're saying there is we have $1 million of coverage. It applies to the league, and it applies to any of the clubs who purchase coverage under that policy. But if one club exhausts that $1 million limit on February 3rd, the $1 million is not there any longer for everyone else who's purchased coverage under that policy. So that is what I would consider a shared limit. And it's really only applicable to the excess liability policy. And then the alternative approach for excess liability coverage is a standalone excess liability policy that applies to your club only. So no, there isn't, you're not sharing that limit with the league or any other club under the insurance program. So the reason we offer the shared limit option is, one, the league has been kind enough to extend that policy to its membership, and it's the most cost-effective way. But if you are really truly looking for that additional liability protection, I would recommend the standalone policy.
But the basic policy doesn't. I mean, you've got those coverages with the basic policy, the 1 million and the 5 million, and that's not a shared liability, correct? And see, you've confused me now. I was right. So you've got that. So if someone goes and exhausts that million February 3rd, it's still there, for others February 4th. But premiums would go up again next year.
Right.
Under that scenario. Okay, all right. I hope that's made it clear for everyone. Any questions that we don't get to or we haven't answered thoroughly, at the end of this presentation, the contact information for our friends at American Specialty will be there, and you can reach out. I'm going to try to get to certainly the common questions, those that a number of people have expressed tonight, those that I know come up from year to year. But if we don't get it done, if you don't understand, please get back in touch and don't stay confused, because we've got between Gina, Renee, and Christy, several people dedicated to explaining this stuff. So I'm going to move away from waivers briefly to another question that I think we get a lot, and it's a good question. For a bicycle club, how do we report members? For example, in February, when we pay the premium, we have 700 members, but in July, the rides are great. People hear how great the insurance is. They feel safe. They come out, and everybody signs up. So you got all those first-time guests coming, and now you have 900 members in July. Do they have to get back in touch and pay you for those additional members at that point?
No, we really have the program set up that the club provides kind of a best guess estimate on the number of club members when they register for the insurance. So the only thing I would add is that if you sign up with 100 members, and then month 3 you have 9,000 members, in all fairness to everyone involved, we should probably talk about that. But we certainly don't have it set up where we audit, where you have to report the number of members each month or anything. It's really you provide your best guess based on your experience and what you're anticipating, and there's not any type of audit at the end of the policy period.
But if you yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott. For insurance purposes, and I think this question comes up too, if it's a family membership, it only counts as 2 for insurance purposes.
Great. So simple calculation there. So if you experience truly jaw-dropping triple-digit growth, check back in with American Specialty. But otherwise, honor system, right? It works out, is what I'm hearing, right?
Right, that's right.
Excellent. I sound generous, if not smart, in doing that. We did have a couple of questions about the handling of guests and the way the policy is set up so that people can come ride with you one time and be covered, and the benefits of club membership in terms of the insurance are extended to them. But then when they come back, the insurance company, we expect that they're going to become members of your organization. But, people are asking, well, what happened if, we invite them and they come once and they come back and they're riding again and they haven't signed up as members yet? Or, we don't necessarily always know whether people are members or not when they show up to ride on, one of the many weekly rides. How do you handle those situations, and what are the implications of someone being on a ride who's not a first-time invited guest nor a member?
Right. I think that we just have to do kind of our best at trying to ensure that they are signed up as members. The implication is that in the event of a lawsuit, let's say that one of those guests is named in a lawsuit personally, or they are injured. At the time of claim, we are going to ask, our claims department will ask, is this individual a member of your club? And you would really like to be able to say yes at that time. We know that folks slip through the cracks, and I don't know that there would be a huge investigation into whether or not that person was a member or not a member at the time. But I would say best case would be for the clubs to have a process in place to try to ensure that members who come in on a trial basis for that one time and then come back, that we do get them registered as members so that we can answer, again, honor system, that they are a member of the club. So it's easier to, I would say, defend a position where we had a process and somebody slipped through the cracks than it is to say we don't have a process and we just missed this person.
And I think one thing that we've talked about a little bit in previous webinars and things is most of your rides are on public roads. You can't control who is going to ride alongside you. So, you might say, hey, you're not a member, you can't join us on this. And you can't, you'd be increasing your, your risk if you start trying to keep them away from your ride. It becomes a distraction, and, it maybe becomes more dangerous if you're in this antagonistic situation. But I think that what you would use as an incentive, and before I get to that, and you can stop me or correct me afterwards if I'm wrong about this. So the club would still be defended. Someone is out there and riding with you. Maybe they're not members and should be. Maybe you don't want them there, but they're there anyways. Someone sues the club, the insurance would be there for you. If someone sues that person, the insurance won't be there for them. The participant accident insurance won't be there for them. So that's an incentive I think you can offer to your club members to say, well, you rode with us once. If you had gotten hurt, we would have paid a lot of your medical bills. If you had hurt somebody else and gotten sued, the insurance would have been there to cover you. And sign up as a member so we can continue offering you those benefits in riding with us. Does that make sense?
Right, I would agree with that 100%.
All right. So I hope that we've done a decent job of untangling that. I mean, I think it is something that people uh, worry about a bit. Um, how would you characterize rides that are promoted by an advocacy organization, but that are actually part of a larger unpaid ride, like Bike to Work Day? You know, my Tacoma Park Bike Commuters group promotes Bike to Work Day. We, you know, put up some bike stations. People all over the region are getting together and biking downtown as part of Bike to Work Day. How is that considered within the insurance policy?
I would answer that as again, the entity having coverage in the event that the entity was named in a lawsuit relative to promoting that activity. The idea of the insurance program is that we are not going to be supervising those activities, but rather promoting them and advocating for Bike to Work days. But the entity, the club itself, if brought into a lawsuit as a result of the promotion, would be protected under the policy.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question here real quick, and then I'm going to uh, give everyone a rest from me and let you move on and try to take some more at the end. But this is a good question. How is the term member defined if your club doesn't collect dues?
I think that is a good question. I think you're right, Scott. I don't know, Renee, if you have any thoughts on that. I think that, again, being able to maybe have a list of individuals who you would consider members of the club, you know, whether it's a sign-in sheet, a roster, some type of membership base. I don't think the policy certainly doesn't require you to collect a fee as part of the membership, but rather know who is there, who your membership base is.
And the things that I would add to that in my final bid to appear smart before turning it back over for the rest of the policy um, is, you know, you want them to sign a waiver once a year. So you've got the number of people who have signed your waiver for that year, and then you're paying based on that number, right? So you can define it any way you want as long as you're paying, you know, for those people, and you have some sense through waivers and other means of knowing who they are. So when something happens, if something happens, when they ask, is the person a member, you say, oh, right here, I have, you know, I have all these 3x5 cards, and I flip through to the W's, and there's Scott Williams right there. Yeah, he signed a waiver. I paid for him. He's a member.
Right. That's a great point.
Ooh. All right. Well, I'm gonna mute myself now and turn it back over to you. We will try to get to as many questions as we can after the end of your presentation, and then we will, you know, do the best we can to answer the other questions in the coming days in whatever way is appropriate.
Okay. And I will try to go through these last slides a little quicker. I think they lend themselves well to that because I certainly want to be respectful to everyone's time, of their time, and be able to field questions because I know that a lot of times is the most helpful. So talking a little bit here on this slide about how you purchase the GL and the excess accident medical coverage. We do have the insurance purchasing website up. It is available. We've had lots of clubs purchase the coverage effective to February 1st, 2016 already. This is also the website where you go to register your special events online and request certificates of insurance for your special events. The premium for the coverage, other than special events coverage, because again, we won't know the premium until we know how many participants are participate in the special event, are paid for at the time of enrollment. Special event premium is based on the number of participants and paid after the event, but don't forget you have to go in and schedule your event, your special event, even though you're not paying for it before your event takes place. Coverage begins effective February 1st, 2016, or the day after February 1st where you purchased the coverage, and ends on February 1st, 2017. There are discounts applied after August of 2016. if you sign on kind of late, it's a prorated premium. The cost, which I know everyone is looking forward to hearing about. And again, I would just kind of start by saying that we did, like I had indicated when we were talking about the claims, we do have a rate increase this year, and it is significant, or it's really applicable or resulting from the losses this past year. The $1.7 million of loss development, the loss ratio that we talked about on both the general liability and the participant accident policy. Having said that, I would also share with you that we have really here in our office received an uptick in the number of calls from other cycling organizations who are not part of the league who are having trouble securing coverage. So that tells me that it's not specific to the league's insurance program, but really it is specific to the industry and how we're reacting to losses involving cycling. And so we don't have another insurance program for cycling organizations outside of the league. We focus our attention on making sure that we're putting together the best program for the league. You certainly benefit from group purchasing power, which is what allows us to keep the rates as low as possible, because we know there's a large group of individuals who will be purchasing and clubs who will be purchasing coverage. It also allows our clubs, our other colleagues who unfortunately do have a loss, to be able to continue to secure coverage at a reasonable cost. When we've looked at the claims, and I should have added this when we were going through the claims history, but we don't see an area where there was a club who was extremely negligent, and if they would have changed one or two or three things, this lawsuit never would have applied. Those aren't the types of losses we're seeing. We're seeing the types of losses like we talked about that could happen, unfortunately, at any one of your clubs. So again, just another way that we're benefiting from this group purchasing power, making sure that all of our colleagues have access to a good quality, cost-effective program. So for our club activities, it's based on membership and per member. The rate for if you have 0 to 1,000 members is $3.53 per member. Goes down to $3.13 if you are between 1,000 and 2,000 members. Over 2,000 members goes down to $2.73, and that is subject to a minimum premium of $174 per club. We will do a snapshot view of the difference in the rates, so you don't have to kind of try to keep up with what the differences are, but we'll look at that here in just a few minutes. The advocacy organizations, if you're an advocacy organization with no club or social rides, your premium is $113. The reason it's lower is because the excess accident medical coverage does not apply, because you don't need that if you're not on bike. Conducts club or social rides, the premium goes up to $189. Again, that includes the general liability and the excess accident medical coverage. If you have year-round office space that you rent or lease, we can add coverage to your policy for an additional premium of $65 to provide coverage for claims resulting from your office exposure. So if somebody comes in, slips, trips, falls, and brings suit against your club, this is where you're going to be protected. Again, it's an optional coverage, so if you have that exposure, you need to be sure, and you don't have it insured elsewhere, you need to be sure to mark yes when you're going through the insurance purchasing website. Bicycle education courses, we give a pretty significant credit if you're using only LCIs as instructors. If you are offering only classroom education, the premium is $55. Classroom and on-bike instruction, again, for those clubs using only LCIs as instructors, is $163. It goes up to $73 and $218, respectively, if you are not using LCIs as instructors. Bike refurbishment, we talked a little bit about that and when that might be needed and what is not contemplated under that extension, that coverage is $80 if you have that exposure and want to insure it here. Your special event pricing, again, special event pricing is where you would have a special event if you're charging a fee for your ride that's open to individuals other than your membership.
I don't even think that matters.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, Renee was correcting me there.
So
special event, if you're charging a fee, and the rate is between 0 and 1,000 participants, is $3.83. Anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 is $2.96 per participant, and over 2,000 participants is $2.22 per participant. With respect to special events, you do not pay premium on your club membership. So if you have a member participating in that special event, you wouldn't pay premium for that member. Again, they're already contemplated under the policy. The minimum premium there is $191 per special event. Oh, and then here's the note for bicycle clubs: do not count members with reporting special event when reporting special event participation. Here is the summary. We do a 10-year rate change summary so that you can see quickly the difference between the rates. And you can see, obviously, as we've talked about, because of claims activity, we have had an increase. If we look at it in comparison, if we just focus on 2016, at the bottom of the chart here, you'll see that the rate is about 56 cents higher per member, and the minimum premium is approximately $29 per member higher, or $29 per club higher than expiring. So again, for simplicity, the chart shows the rate and minimum premium that apply to, we just focus more on bicycle clubs on this chart, and the per special event minimum premium. All other rates within the program have really changed about the same percentage or dollar amount throughout. Again, the factors that impact the cost are the league's losses, inflation, including medical inflation or the cost to defend a lawsuit, and then overall market conditions. So we weren't really faced with an increase resulting from market conditions this year as much as we were faced with the increase as a result of loss results. We want to talk a little bit, excuse me, about the optional coverages that we briefly mentioned on one of the first slides. The first optional coverage that we're going to talk about is non-owned and hired automobile liability coverage, and this policy provides coverage for the use of non-owned or hired autos. So an example of a non-owned vehicle or a hired vehicle is a vehicle that you borrow or rent from an entity, and those vehicles that are used during the course of your covered activities. If you are to purchase this coverage, it would provide coverage for the insured club as well as anyone using, with the club's permission, an auto that the club hires or borrows. It would not apply if the non-owned and hired automobile liability policy does not apply for an individual who is driving their own personal vehicle on behalf of the club. The limit is $1 million per occurrence and aggregate. In order to secure a quote for this coverage, there's a separate insurance application that has to be completed, and then we have to understand really the club's driving policies. For example, who is permitted to drive, what is the minimum age for drivers, and things like that. The premium is really subject to underwriting based on the answers that you provide. So again, then the non-owned and hired automobile liability policy is excess. Is optional coverage. It's not automatic. It does not apply when you go online and purchase your club insurance. The second optional coverage that we're going to talk about is the directors and officers liability coverage. And directors and officers liability coverage is coverage for wrongful acts such as discrimination, wrongful termination, mismanagement of funds. So if you have a donor, for example, for your advocacy organization who says, you know, I've donated $5,000 a year for the past 2 years, or maybe it's $10,000, and that money is nowhere to be found, and I think that you used it inappropriately, and now I want my money back, or they're going to sue you as a result, this is the coverage that applies. The directors and officers liability coverage specifically excludes coverage for bodily injury claims. So again, while the same entity and individuals are covered under the policy, meaning the insured club, the club's board of directors, the club's volunteers are all insured under this policy if it's purchased. Similarly to under the general liability policy, the two policies provide coverage for separate, different types of claims. We get the question a lot on which coverage should we purchase. Should we purchase the directors and officers liability coverage, or should we purchase general liability coverage? And our response is a lot of times, you know, we're really just not smart enough to know what you're going to be sued for, and as a result, we recommend that you purchase both coverages. And we really do recommend and think that it's important for both coverages to at least be considered by the clubs. The limits that we offer, and this coverage can be purchased right online on the insurance purchasing website. We offer a limit of $1 million for $1 million and a limit of $2 million. So you have two separate options. The retention, which is a deductible, similar to a deductible on your auto insurance, is $500 for directors and officers liability claims and $1,000 for employment practices liability claims. The employment practices liability claims is where we see most lawsuits under this policy, and it's important to remember that an employment practices claim is like a discrimination or wrongful termination, and that can be from someone other than an employee. A lot of times it's from a club member, for example, where the club member had a role within the club, but the club had to ask the individual to step down, or the club member feels like they should have had more responsibilities, you know, failure to promote type allegation. So this is an optional coverage that is available on the insurance purchasing website right here. It looks like we have the link here. This coverage begins the day following the day that you purchase the coverage. So if you were to purchase the coverage today, it would actually go into effect on February 1st, because this is the new policy period begins in February. Premium is prorated for policies purchased after February 1st. So if you don't purchase coverage until April, your rate is going to be a little lower than the premium listed here at $550 for $1 million limit plus a $25 purchasing fee, or $850 for a $2 million limit. So it is what we call prorated. LCI and seminar coverage, coaches coverage, like we talked about, applies automatically, and this is the general liability coverage. This is not an optional coverage, so now we're going back to a coverage that's automatically included. It includes coverage during smart cycling seminars and classes conducted in accordance with the league's policies and procedures. Again, it's automatic for those LCIs, and if you need proof of insurance as an LCI, we can provide that for you. And here is the contact information that Scott promised for our team, and as Scott said, we are always available to field those questions, and we'll do our very best to get them answered for you. But now we can take any additional questions that you have, Scott.
All right, I do have some here. We won't get to them all. I'm sorry, everyone asking good questions, but we will look at these questions afterwards and try to get answers to you. If we don't get answers to you, please, bring those questions to us, and we will do the best we can. I promised we were done with waivers. It was not a good. Promise, but this is a really good question about waivers, so or maybe two good questions about waivers. The first being, how long do you need to keep a copy of that waiver? How long is long enough?
Our standard recommendation is that you should keep the waiver for at least the statute of limitations in your state. So if the statute of limitations for your state is 3 years, we would recommend that you keep it for that period of time. One additional comment on that is that if the individual was involved in a excuse me, a crash during the activity, you might want to keep that one a little longer. Or if there is a pending lawsuit, obviously keep that one longer. But at least the statute of limitations for your state.
And one thing that I remember hearing is that, at least in some jurisdictions, the statute of limitations for minors doesn't kick in until they are 18. Is that?
Yes, that is correct.
So if someone is involved in a ride and they're 15, it could be 6 years. It could be 8 years, depending on the statute of limitation, before, they would no longer be able to bring suit. So keep those things. Make sure you have a record of them. Let's see what else we have. So a question about equipment in the club's care. If you have designated a member, they say, hey, I've got a big garage, I got nothing in there now, I don't have a car, I just have a bunch of bikes, but I got room for more. And you say, okay, well, we're going to go to Gina's house, and Gina's garage is where we are storing equipment for the club before this big ride. Is that what that optional coverage is going to cover for us, even if it's in Gina's garage?
I would say no. I would say, and the reason I would say no is that, one, the equipment that we're covering is not equipment that we own from, that the club owns. So if the club owns the equipment and they're storing it at Gina's house because Gina's house is close to the event site, then that would not apply. The other thing that I would say is that I think that it would be difficult to say that it was in the club's care, custody, or control if it is at a member's home. It really should, I think it's a little bit of a gray area, because if you designate, for example, a member at an event to watch the bikes during lunch, I would consider that in the club's care, custody, or control. So I would probably be looking to the whoever owns the equipment, working with them to see if you could have coverage apply even while it is away from their premises or while it is in our control, or if you did need to store it at a member's home, looking at that member's homeowner's insurance to see whether or not it would apply.
Okay, so that might be a good one for you to call if you have a special situation, to get in touch with American Specialty and say, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing. What are the insurance implications of this?
Right.
No question is too specific for American Specialty. Sometimes they're not specific enough, but it's never, ever
Right.
too specific. Someone asked whether they can add the education coverage on later if they're not sure whether they're going to be doing education courses when they sign up for the club insurance, but later they might.
Right. So if when you sign up you are not anticipating offering the education courses and you decide later on that that is something that you want to offer, you can go back into the website and you would need to contact Renee or Christy to have that coverage added.
Okay.
But yes, it can be added. One thing to remember is that it's going to be added the date that we're contacted. So if you decide to add the coverage today for the policy that expires on February 1st, but your education courses took place in November of 2015, that's not going to help you. So it would be added the date that we're notified.
Okay. And one thing, we do get a lot of, there's some questions and confusion about the education um, policy, and I think maybe if I give a little explanation of how it evolved, that will help. But I'm not going to talk for long because I know everybody is about ready to be doing something other than this. Um, and and that is that we had some organizations that weren't doing a lot of club rides, but they were doing like public education courses. Part of their mission as a nonprofit was teaching these bike classes, and they wanted those, in particular, they wanted to make sure they had coverage for that, that there was participant accident coverage, and the only avenue that was open for them at the time was to insure every class of 10 people, 12 people, as a special event, subject to that, special event minimum. So they were looking at insuring each class for, $150 or whatever the special event minimum was that year, and they weren't even charging that much for them. Um, so they're like, can you do something for us? We do these courses, and we want to make sure that people are covered and the club is covered, but we can't afford to pay $150 every time we offer a class. We do them, every other week. So we came up with this option so that there's, that's not even the minimum special event coverage for the education coverage, and it covers the classes all year if you are doing that kind of thing. So it is not, and again, always correct me if I'm wrong. So it's not, oh, we're giving, teaching, emergency maneuvers to riders before a special event or before a club ride or something like that. It is someone who's going out and explicitly offering bike education to the community. Um, so I hope that is both correct and edifying and clarifying.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I thought maybe I'd stump
Yes.
you.
No, we definitely agree.
Okay. I was about to wrap it up, but I got one more question, and it is a waiver question. Um, are minors covered for rides or special events if their parents sign a waiver? Can parents sign waivers for minors?
So I think there's two questions there. One, are they covered under the insurance program? And the answer is yes. If they are, a member or registered to participate in a special event. So yes, they are covered under the insurance program. And with respect to the waiver, the validity of minor waivers signed by parents, again, we recommend that you continue to secure those so that we have something to talk about, but oftentimes they are not admissible because the parent cannot, in most jurisdictions, sign away the rights of the minor participant. So yes, they are covered under the insurance program. Yes, the parents should sign on their behalf because the parent signing the minor waiver is going to be better from a defensibility perspective than the minor signing the waiver at 13 or 14. But in terms of will it release you from all liability arising from that minor if that minor was injured, we again can't guarantee that. Scott?
Oh, I said the most brilliant thing just now, and I had the mute button down. Sorry about that. No, I was just saying there are a lot of people still here. There are a lot more questions. If I didn't get to your question, you're not alone. People are very serious. The club directors are very serious about their insurance and taking care of their club and their people. It is very impressive. But I think we are out of time at this point. And we will do what we can to get answers to you, seek them out if they don't come to you. Or if what comes to you is not answer enough, we can go back and look at questions and try to get back in touch with people. We know who you are and what you asked. Thank you so much for doing this for us, Gina, Renee, Christy. We appreciate your expertise and care that goes into this. immensely. So thank you very much, and good night, and recordings and slides will be available on our website soon, and we will let everyone know where. So.
Very good. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.